This is not a drill. If you are a veteran or if you know a veteran, the next few minutes could redefine your financial and medical future. We are standing on the edge of a benefits cliff, and 2026 is the year the ground gives way. The benefits you rely on, the programs your service earned, are not permanently guaranteed. They are subject to legislative review, budget reconciliation, and the political winds of change. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on 7 critical veteran benefit programs that are currently facing sunset clauses, massive defunding threats, or structural changes so severe they might as well vanish entirely. Missing this information is not just inconvenient. It could cost you tens of thousands of dollars, access to vital health care, and the support structure your family depends on. You need to understand the threat, and more importantly, you need to know the specific, actionable steps you must take right now to lock in your benefits before the clock runs out. Let's start with the cornerstone of post-service life, a program that has changed the trajectory of millions of military families. The PA-MT Post-9/11 GI Bill and its associated monthly housing allowance, or BAAH. Now let me be crystal clear, the GI Bill itself is not likely to disappear completely. That would be a political third rail. But what is under constant threat, what budget hawks scrutinize every single fiscal year, is the massive financial outlay associated with the housing stipends. The true value of the post-9/11 GI Bill isn't just the tuition payment. It's the fact that it pays you to live while you learn. It's the stability the monthly housing allowance provides, calculated based on the cost of living for an E5, with dependence in your specific school's zip code. This allowance can be substantial, often representing the difference between scraping by and focusing entirely on your education. The threat here is multi-layered and insidious. First, there is the persistent push to cap the BAH nationally. Imagine living in San Diego or New York City, where the current BAH calculation reflects a very high cost of living, only to have that capped at the national average for a much lower cost area, like rural Oklahoma. That single legislative change, which is often proposed under the guise of standardizing benefits, would instantly gut the program's utility for veterans seeking education in high-cost metro areas. It wouldn't disappear, but its value would effectively vanish, leaving countless veterans unable to afford rent near their chosen university. This isn't just theoretical. Similar caps have been proposed and narrowly defeated multiple times in recent appropriation cycles. The political argument is simple. The cost is too high, and the system is being gamed by institutions in expensive areas. Secondly, there's the constant legislative tinkering with eligibility requirements and transferability. We've seen attempts to restrict who can transfer benefits to dependents, and we've seen proposals to reduce the total number of months of entitlement available. If these changes take effect in 2026, or if the BAH is drastically capped, the program as we know it, the program you planned your post-military life around, will cease to exist. The financial impact is staggering. A student losing $1,500 a month in BAH over 4 years of schooling is losing $72,000 in direct tax-free income. That is a massive hit to financial stability, a devastating blow to a family transitioning out of uniform. You must be aware that the funding mechanism for this specific allowance is highly volatile, tied directly to annual defense spending bills and education appropriations. The current generous structure is a target, plain and simple. We need to look at the legislative history. Every time there is a major push for fiscal austerity, the GI Bill's housing component is on the chopping block. The argument is always framed as efficiency, but the outcome is always less money in the veteran's pocket. The political reality is that benefits programs that involve direct cash payments are always the easiest to criticize and the most vulnerable to cuts. Furthermore, the complexity of the current calculation system, while beneficial to the veteran, is often cited by opponents as a reason for reform. They argue for simplification, and in Washington, simplification almost always means reduction. If you are planning on using your GI Bill after 2026, or if you have children who will rely on transferred benefits, you need to track these legislative movements with extreme prejudice. The disappearance of the full, uncapped BAH benefit is a clear and present danger to your future educational and economic security. The difference between the current benefit and a capped benefit can equate to the entire cost of living in many major cities. This isn't a small adjustment, it's a fundamental change to the economic promise made to those who served after 9/11. The ability to attend a top-tier university in a high-cost area relies entirely on the existing uncapped BAH structure. If that structure vanishes, so does the opportunity for many veterans to access the best education available. The ripple effect extends to the schools themselves, which rely on the influx of veterans utilizing this benefit. A reduction in BAH could lead to a decline in veteran enrollment, potentially causing specialized veteran support programs at those institutions to also disappear due to lack of funding justification. This is a complex ecosystem, and the housing allowance is the linchpin. If the linchpin is pulled, the entire structure wobbles, threatening the quality and accessibility of post-service education for millions. We are talking about the difference between financial independence and taking on massive student loan debt just to cover basic living expenses while attending school. This is why the threat to the GI Bill BAH is not just a budget issue, it's an economic justice issue for the veteran community. Moving on to a program that is truly life-sustaining for thousands of families, but is constantly battling internal and external pressures. The VA's Program of Comprehensive Assistance for Family Caregivers, PCACF, often simply called the Caregiver Support Program, CSP. This benefit provides monthly stipends, training, medical coverage, and respite care for family members who care for veterans with serious service-connected disabilities. The threat of disappearance here is not about the concept of caregiver support, but the continuous brutal cycling of eligibility and the severe restrictions placed on the legacy versus new groups. The program has been plagued by implementation issues, especially the arbitrary deadlines and reassessments that determine who qualifies for the higher stipend tiers. The VA has struggled mightily to manage the massive influx of applications and the complexity of assessing the need for constant supervision. The immediate threat stems from the ongoing legislative requirement for the VA to continuously reassess and, crucially, potentially disenroll veterans and their caregivers from the program. The original intent was to expand the program to all eras of veterans, but the execution has been fraught with bureaucratic hurdles and heart-wrenching denials. Specifically, the expansion to the pre-9/11 legacy veterans has been slow, expensive, and has led to political friction regarding its sustainability. If Congress decides that the cost of maintaining the current level of stipend and support for the full scope of eligible veterans is too high, the easiest and most immediate cut is to tighten the eligibility criteria, drastically reduce the stipend amounts, or, worst of all, freeze new enrollments entirely. Imagine being a spouse who quit their job to provide 24/7 care for a severely injured veteran, relying on that monthly stipend for your family's survival, only to receive a letter stating that a bureaucratic review has determined your veteran no longer meets the arbitrary criteria for inability to perform activities of daily living. This scenario is happening right now, but the potential for a mass disenrollment event driven by legislative mandate to cut costs looms large over 2026. The financial hit is catastrophic. Losing a stipend that can reach over $3,000 per month, plus losing health insurance for the caregiver, instantly throws a family into a financial crisis. It forces the caregiver to choose between finding outside employment or maintaining the crucial high-level care their veteran requires. The program is currently under intense scrutiny because of its exponential cost growth, and whenever a program's cost growth exceeds projections, it becomes a prime target for legislative pruning. We are talking about the potential disappearance of the financial lifeline that keeps thousands of disabled veterans at home, surrounded by loved ones rather than institutionalized. The disappearance of this benefit would not just be a financial disaster, it would be a humanitarian crisis, forcing veterans who require constant assistance into more expensive and often less personal institutional care environments. Furthermore, the political will to maintain the program at its current level of expense is constantly tested by deficit concerns. The complexity of the tiered system, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, itself invites legislative tampering, allowing lawmakers to propose simply eliminating the highest cost tiers, effectively gutting the support for the most severely injured veterans. If you are enrolled in this program or plan to enroll, you must document everything now, understand the reassessment process, and prepare for the very real possibility that the stipend component, the most crucial part of the benefit, could be severely curtailed or even eliminated for new applicants after 2026. This benefit is fundamentally unstable because it is seen as an entitlement outside of traditional service-connected disability compensation, making it an easier target for cuts than core medical services. The third program under the budgetary guillotine is the VA Community Care Program, the successor to the Mission Act and the old Veterans Choice Program. This is the program that allows veterans to receive private sector medical care when the VA cannot provide timely or geographically accessible treatment. While the need for community care is universally accepted, the funding mechanism and the criteria for access are perpetually under fire. The core threat here is the consistent attempt to tighten the eligibility criteria, specifically the wait time and drive time thresholds. Currently, if the VA cannot offer an IO, appointment within a set number of days, usually 20 days for primary care, or if the nearest VA facility is too far away, usually 30-60 minutes drive time depending on the specialty, the veteran is authorized to see a private doctor paid for by the VA. The cost of this program is astronomical, and it is growing far faster than the VA's internal budget projections. As a result, there is immense political pressure to force veterans back into the VA system, regardless of wait times or distance. If Congress decides to double the wait time threshold, say from 20 days to 40 days, or increase the drive time requirement, the community care program doesn't technically disappear, but its utility evaporates for the vast majority of veterans. Imagine waiting 6 weeks for a critical specialist appointment, knowing that if the threshold were still 20 days, you would already be treated. For veterans in rural areas, increasing the drive time threshold from 60 minutes to 90 minutes could mean the difference between accessing care locally or driving 3 hours round trip to a VA facility for every single appointment. The legislative strategy is not to outright kill the program, but to choke off access by making the hurdles too high to clear. This is a quiet, bureaucratic disappearance. Furthermore, there are constant proposals to shift the funding for community care back into the general VA medical services budget, rather than having a dedicated emergency fund. If that happens, the community care program will have to compete directly with internal VA needs, and when budgets are tight, private care referrals will inevitably be the first expense to be drastically reduced. The disappearance of easy access to community care is a severe threat to the health outcomes of millions of veterans, especially those with complex chronic conditions requiring timely specialty treatment. If you rely on private sector specialists through this program, you must understand that the thresholds are political footballs, constantly being moved to manage costs. The current criteria are not set in stone. They are highly vulnerable to legislative maneuvering, particularly in the lead-up to the 2026 budget cycle, where major cuts are often sought to offset spending elsewhere. The inability to quickly access private care is not just an inconvenience. It can be life-threatening for conditions requiring immediate intervention. The political narrative often suggests that community care is wasteful or inefficient, ignoring the fact that the VA's infrastructure simply cannot handle the current patient load. If this program is effectively strangled by rising thresholds, the immediate consequence will be massive backlogs within the VA system itself, leading to a humanitarian crisis of delayed care. This program, which promised timely access, could disappear in practice, leaving veterans stranded waiting months for necessary treatment. The financial implications for the VA are huge, but the health implications for the veteran are even larger. Our fourth major area of concern, and one that is highly complex and frequently misunderstood, is the potential legislative targeting of specific categories within Special Monthly Compensation, SMC. SMC is additional compensation paid to veterans due to the severity of their service-connected disabilities, such as the loss of a limb, the need for aid and attendance, or being housebound. SMC is crucial because it recognizes that certain combinations of disabilities create a level of dependence and financial burden far exceeding a standard 100% rating. The specific targets for potential cuts are often the high-cost categories, particularly SMCL, SMCR, and SMCT, which relate to aid and attendance, ANA, and the highest levels of required personal assistance. Why is this vulnerable? Because SMC payments are high, sometimes reaching over $10,000 per month, and they represent a significant outlay in the VA compensation budget. Budget reformers frequently argue that the criteria for ANA are too broad or that the system is susceptible to abuse, despite rigorous medical reviews. The legislative threat is the introduction of stricter, narrower definitions for need for aid and attendance, or housebound status. Currently, SMC eligibility is based on a comprehensive assessment of the veteran's ability to manage daily life. A legislative change could mandate that eligibility requires a specific, irreversible medical diagnosis, or that it is tied only to physical rather than cognitive impairment. This narrowing of criteria would instantly disqualify thousands of veterans who currently rely on this compensation to pay for in-home care, specialized equipment, or necessary modifications to their homes. The compensation itself might not disappear, but the eligibility criteria could become so restrictive that the program effectively vanishes for the majority of veterans who currently qualify. The financial impact of losing SMC is immediate and devastating. It means losing thousands of dollars needed to pay professional caregivers or to offset the income lost by a spouse acting as a full-time caregiver. This is a benefit that directly addresses the most profound and severe consequences of military service. Targeting it is politically risky, but the high dollar amount makes it an irresistible target for those seeking to demonstrate fiscal responsibility. Furthermore, there is continuous pressure to align VA definitions of disability with Social Security disability definitions, which are often much stricter. If SMC eligibility were tied more closely to SSA rules, thousands of veterans would find their benefits suddenly terminated or reduced. The complexity of SMC makes it difficult for the public to understand, which ironically makes it easier for legislators to quietly introduce subtle, restrictive changes that drastically reduce the number of eligible recipients. Veterans receiving SMC need to be extremely vigilant regarding any proposed changes to the definitions of aid, attendance, or housebound, as these semantic shifts are the quiet way that this critical benefit will disappear for many in the coming years. This is not about eliminating the payment structure entirely. It's about making the qualifying threshold virtually impossible to meet, thereby eliminating the benefit for those who need it most. The high cost of these specific SMC categories means they are always under a microscope, and subtle legislative tweaks can have massive, life-altering consequences for the most severely injured veterans. The fifth program facing a potential clawback is a specific financial incentive that makes home ownership affordable for many transitioning service members. The VA Home Loan Guarantee Funding Fee Waivers. The VA home loan is one of the most powerful benefits available, allowing veterans to purchase homes with zero down payment and competitive interest rates. Crucially, many veterans currently qualify for a waiver of the VA funding fee, a percentage of the loan amount charged to help cover potential losses. This waiver is currently granted to veterans receiving VA disability compensation for a service-connected disability. The funding fee itself can be substantial, ranging from 1.25% to 3.3% of the loan amount, depending on the veteran's service history and whether it's a subsequent use of the benefit. On a $400,000 loan, a 2.3% fee is $9,200. That fee is typically rolled into the loan, increasing the veteran's debt and monthly payment. The waiver is an enormous financial advantage, essentially a grant of thousands of dollars at the time of purchase. The threat of disappearance comes from two main angles. First, there is the ongoing pressure to make the VA home loan program entirely self-sufficient, meaning all costs associated with the guarantee must be covered by fees. If legislative efforts succeed in raising the required level of self-sufficiency, the easiest way to achieve that is to eliminate or severely restrict the funding fee waivers, even for disabled veterans. The argument would be that the veteran is already receiving disability compensation, and the waiver is a redundancy that the program can no longer afford. Secondly, we are seeing proposals to restrict the waiver only to veterans with 100% permanent and total disability ratings, excluding those with lower ratings who still rely on that savings. If the waiver disappears for veterans with, say, a 30% or 50% rating, the financial barrier to home ownership instantly rises by thousands of dollars. For many veterans, the ability to avoid paying that upfront fee is the key to closing the deal without depleting their savings. Losing the waiver doesn't kill the loan program, but it dramatically reduces its utility and affordability, especially for first-time homebuyers. This change, which could be implemented quickly through a simple budget bill, would be a massive financial blow. It would effectively disappear the benefit of closing cost savings for hundreds of thousands of disabled veterans who rely on it every year. If you are a disabled veteran planning on utilizing the VA home loan in the coming years, locking in that benefit now, while the waiver is broad, is absolutely critical. Waiting until 2026 runs the risk of having to suddenly absorb thousands of dollars in closing costs you had not budgeted for. This is a quiet financial disappearance that hits the pocketbook hard at the moment of the largest financial transaction of a veteran's life. The ability to enter the housing market without the burden of the funding fee is a huge economic advantage, and the political push to reduce this benefit is based purely on cost recovery for the federal government, prioritizing budget balancing over veteran financial assistance. Next, we address a benefit that is critical for long-term career success, but is constantly being hollowed out by underfunding and decentralization. The mandatory quality and structure of the Transition Assistance Program, TAP. TAP is the required course that all separating service members must attend, covering everything from budgeting and resume writing to understanding VA benefits. The program itself is mandated by law, but the quality and funding of the instruction are highly vulnerable. The threat of disappearance here is the disappearance of effective, high-quality, standardized transition training. What we are seeing currently is a move toward decentralization and outsourcing, where the quality of the mandatory training depends heavily on the installation and the contractor hired. If legislative efforts succeed in reducing the required number of mandatory contact hours, or if funding for the specialized tracks like the Boots to Business Entrepreneurship course or the Career Skills program is cut, the TAP program will devolve into a useless check-the-box exercise. It won't disappear on paper, but its practical value, the critical guidance that prevents veterans from stumbling into massive debt or unemployment, will vanish entirely. The financial cost of a poor transition is immense, often leading to prolonged unemployment, underemployment, and financial distress. Losing the robust, federally supported structure of TAP means losing the safety net that ensures every service member, regardless of their background or rank, receives basic, standardized preparation for civilian life. Furthermore, there is constant political discussion about making certain components of TAP optional, especially for senior leaders or those with specific civilian job offers. While optionality sounds good, it often leads to reduced funding and a decline in the overall priority of the program. If TAP loses its mandatory comprehensive structure, the result will be a flood of unprepared veterans entering the civilian workforce, which ultimately costs the government more in unemployment benefits, health care, and financial assistance down the line. The disappearance of effective transition training is a silent killer of veteran careers. It is essential that the current legislative mandates regarding the comprehensiveness and funding of TAP remain strong. Any effort to weaken those mandates is an effort to make the program functionally disappear. The structure of TAP, which requires specific modules and participation rates, is a direct result of decades of lobbying by veteran service organizations who recognized the catastrophic consequences of unprepared transitions. If that structure is dismantled in favor of cheaper, less comprehensive alternatives, the benefit itself is gone, replaced by a hollow shell of compliance. Finally, we turn to a benefit that is often the first to be proposed for elimination when the VA budget is scrutinized. Comprehensive dental benefits for veterans with non-service-connected disabilities. Currently, full dental benefits are only provided to veterans who are 100% service-connected disabled, or whose dental issues are directly service-connected, or those who meet specific, narrow criteria, like being a former POW. The vast majority of veterans do not receive routine dental care through the VA, while there is continuous lobbying to expand dental coverage to all enrolled veterans. The opposite threat is much more immediate: the elimination of the limited dental coverage that is currently provided to certain non-service-connected groups. For example, some veterans are currently eligible for one-time dental treatment to make a condition non-painful, or those receiving care under specific vocational rehabilitation programs. The political argument against maintaining even these limited benefits is that dental care is expensive, and since most veterans already have access to discounted insurance plans, like the VA Dental Insurance Program, which is not a benefit, but a paid insurance plan, the government should not subsidize non-service-connected dental issues. If Congress decides to eliminate the small pockets of free dental care currently offered to veterans who are below the 100% threshold but require immediate, non-service-connected treatment, that benefit disappears entirely. This means veterans who might be poor, homeless, or otherwise unable to afford private care will lose access to even basic emergency dental services. While the impact is smaller in scope than the GI Bill, the humanitarian impact is significant, as untreated dental issues can quickly lead to severe systemic health problems. The disappearance of these limited dental benefits would be felt most acutely by the most economically vulnerable veterans, those who cannot afford the monthly premiums of the paid insurance programs. When looking for easy, low-visibility cuts, dental care for non-service-connected conditions is always at the top of the list because it is not a mandated core medical benefit. The threat here is the total elimination of subsidized dental care for any veteran below the 100% disability threshold, regardless of their financial or emergency medical needs. This is a subtle yet significant erosion of the overall health care promise made to veterans. So, we have laid out the 7 critical areas: the GI Bill BAH, the Caregiver Support Stipend, community care access thresholds, specific SMC categories, VA home loan fee waivers, the quality of TAP, and limited non-service-connected dental benefits. These are not programs that are merely facing minor adjustments. They are facing structural threats that will render them functionally useless or financially inaccessible to large portions of the veteran community by 2026. The political landscape is volatile. Deficit reduction is a national priority, and historically, veteran benefits, particularly those involving direct payments or expensive external services, are the first to be scrutinized and targeted for massive reform, which is often a euphemism for reduction. The crucial takeaway is this: you cannot afford to wait. If you are eligible for any of these programs, you must take action now to lock in your benefits under the current, more generous rules. For the GI Bill, if you have dependents, ensure the transferability is complete and documented. If you are a caregiver, ensure your enrollment and documentation for the CSP are impeccable and prepare for potential reassessment appeals now. If you rely on community care, use it frequently and document every time you hit the wait time or drive time threshold, creating a paper trail of necessity. If you are eligible for SMC, ensure your medical records are robust and clearly define the need for aid and attendance or housebound status, anticipating stricter future criteria. If you plan to buy a home, accelerate your timeline to utilize the funding fee waiver before it is restricted. And finally, if you are transitioning, demand the highest quality TAP training available and push back against any attempts to streamline or shorten the mandatory curriculum. The year 2026 is rapidly approaching. It marks the convergence of several major legislative deadlines and budget reconciliation cycles. Do not let the benefits you earned disappear quietly in a bureaucratic shuffle. Stay informed, get enrolled, and secure your future now before the window closes and the promise made to you vanishes. Your vigilance today is the only guarantee of your stability tomorrow.